Is Group A with Jeff Sutton.
Okay, good morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Abbey. And want to thank the organizers for appointing me to be the backup to the group lead. Jeff Davis was the first choice. And so I tried to do the best I could. We had a very spirited group, very good discussions, and very positive. And what I tried to do, probably inadequately, was to summarize the main points, and they've been distributed to you. I apologize to any members of the group that I didn't capture a key point that you may have raised, and for this reason, it's a preliminary draft. It's not for distribution. There's a disclaimer. I did pretty much all that I could, short of having a watermark printed draft on the paper, which I think would just make it very difficult to read. But fundamentally, this being a space medicine summit, the countries are well represented, and the emphasis from the research side was on operational research. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. Because there are very important aspects of basic research and translational research that were not addressed. And so what I'd like to do, with your permission, is just to walk through some of the main points. I'm not going to read the points, but I'm going to comment on them. I think that there really was general agreement that there's a need to expand the current medical evaluation platform that exists to incorporate a standard protocol for research measures. And this needs to be internationally agreed upon, and it needs to be acted and implemented soon. And while an exact date was not specified, in my notes, I did put down that it should be by a determined date. This is a rather urgent matter, and I think that there was recognition that there is good BDC, baseline data collection, and field tests, but that they're not standardized in the same way that the medical evaluations are. And in fact, I think that this first point brings out something that was a recurrent theme in the group, and that is that there really is a need to break down some of the silos that have developed among the nations in terms of what's being evaluated and how it's being evaluated. The second point is that there really is a need to step back. There have been quite a number of expeditions on ISS that have now taken place with very important medical data, and it's time to review what's known on the ISS missions, both from a medical standpoint and also a research standpoint. So while the title of the group is Cooperative Research Opportunities during the space station lunar missions, and there's a little bit, I think, of a priori perspective of looking forward. I think that there's a very good time to assess where we're at. However, in going forward, it was echoed by a number of individuals that it is desirable to have crew involvement internationally in the research enterprise, and that the consent be shared internationally. And this is a little bit of a hot point, and it was discussed there. It's clearly complicated, but there is an issue that's not going to go away. It's only going to get worse in some ways, that the consent and the data sharing really needs to be addressed. With respect to the ISS, which I think most of the discussion really focused on, although there were some general issues that applied to both ISS and lunar missions, there were some specific opportunities and needs that were identified, and these are listed in the bulleted form. As the crew number increases, there's going to be an increased need for the use of common resources and equipment. Most of what was emphasized in the discussion concerned medical resources. Not every nation needs to fly every medical kit and resources for contingencies. There really needs to, from a planning standpoint, aboard ISS be resources that are used by all crew. And I think that in all fairness, this point was brought out in a number of discussions that in many instances things are shared, but I think that there was also discussion that there's room for improvement. Just as in the need in the first point for a standard platform of tests of physiological measures, there really was emphasis on a need for universal protocols for countermeasures and also consistent reporting on the use of these countermeasures. A very good point that was raised that pertaining to the increase in crew size that I had alluded to is the need to really organize and structure crew activities, the complexity of tasks that are going on to best utilize not only crew time but the resources that exist upon station, and then in this context also be aware of off-nominal events and contingencies that take place. I would say that about somewhere between a third to a half of the discussion time pertained to the next point, which had been brought up in the discussion panels by Dr. Markov, by others, that there's a need for an inclusive international joint working group pertaining to research. Now, there already is ISIL-SWIG, but the Russians are not part of that. And I think that such a group, according to the discussions that took place, needs to be established, and it needs to be established in a timely way. I think that a number of the individuals are very active in participating in a number of other boards, and there was a little bit of skepticism, healthy, I think, in some ways, that was raised about yet another level of bureaucracy and so forth. But I think that at least my sense was, and I hope it was shared by others in the group, that there really is a desire for the leaders in the various countries who are responsible for the research enterprises to sit around a table together and to really discuss the priorities and what's needed and how to cooperate and collaborate in an even better way than we already do. That there are lessons learned about how to do this, that the medical operations folks have a good head start. There are lessons learned from previous enterprises, such as Skylab, but here we had the added complexity of multiple nations. I don't think that people were naive in this discussion. There was clear recognition that this can't only occur at a high level. One needs to get down into the subgroup level, the discipline groups, and to have the discipline groups from various nations discuss the particulars. But what was clear is that this needs to be an inclusive enterprise. It needs to address the multinational stakeholders, and I've listed some of those stakeholders here in terms of partners and the operational folks. Of course, the crew, the physicians, the broad researchers, both basic and translational, as well as the commercial participants. There was a junction point in our discussion as to whether or not we were going to move down a level and actually discuss about how such a group would work, or whether or not we would pull back a little bit and look at some of the other broader issues. And we landed somewhere in the middle. I think that there's obviously room for more discussion, and this needs to be scoped out. But what was agreed upon is that we need to do this now, and I think that the spirit was very positive in that regard. On the second, or on the next point, moving on to some of the points on the back of the sheet, that I think that specifically this joint working group needs to emphasize the research and data acquisition that will really be focused on answers. And although there, of course, the hypothesis-driven research that utilizes station in conducting research that can only be conducted on stations, very important. But again, given that it was an operational group, I think the focus really was on countermeasures, and rightly so. That part of the task of this joint working group really needs to target on enabling risk reduction and also solidifying some of the engineering design requirements and technology developments. A very practical group, a group that's very aware in the discussions of up mass, of down mass limitations, of timelines, and I think the participants in the discussion group were very focused on putting forward concrete ideas that we can act upon. There was no question that everyone liked the idea of the international crews and investigators interacting together in an intellectual environment, really planning the research, conducting, sharing the results. Of course, in many successful missions, the crew have been the PIs and the co-Is on investigations, and it was really felt that part of the charge of the Joint Working Group was to facilitate and ensure that this does happen. And again, it becomes more complicated because of national interests that exist. But again, getting back to that recurrent theme of cutting across national interests and really focusing on the science and on the development of medical countermeasures in future technologies. We didn't talk a whole lot about sample priority areas of research. Part of that was not because of lack of interest, it's just a lack of time, but there was some discussion about how critically important it is to ensure that some of the international questions that are addressed concern the transitions in G, and with respect to lunar ops, that the fundamental question really concerns the differences in physiological systems at 1,6G versus 0G. So that's my summary, and I guess I hand it back to the organizers as to whether or not there are questions and discussions now or presentations of the next group and then general discussion. So thank you very much.
Any questions, discussions yet? Anyone has?
Right, so are there any questions? Yes, Dr. Kerwood.
Do we need a microphone?
Jeff, super job. The second paragraph indicates that the major review of medical data is needed, and then the I guess fifth paragraph recommends the formation of the International Joint Working Group. Would the Joint Working Group be the one tasked to do the review? Is that how it might work?
I think that's certainly one way of doing things. Although my personal interpretation was that these two activities could proceed in some ways in an urgent basis in parallel. I think that it's going to take a little bit of work to even come up with a charter and the ops of the joint working group. Whereas the data exists now, and there's already a critical mass an international community with expertise that I could see that going ahead in the immediate short term.
Okay.
Yeah.
And would that group then, after reviewing the medical data and determining what's currently known, proceed to determine what else is needed that can be accomplished on ISS and begin to shape a project?
Yes, I think that there's overlap between the medical community and the scientific community, and obviously they need to be integrated together. So I understand your question. What I'm really the main point I want to emphasize is that I don't think it's sequential. I really think that these two activities need to launch out. I think that they're individuals who've participated in this summit, who are the leaders. And I think it behooves us to determine among this community, how we go forward. I don't think that the critical mass exists here.
Yeah. I share your sense of some urgency that we have to get on with it if we're going to make an impact on the station.
Right. It's always nice to know where you are before you go forward and to look at the gaps and so forth. Yes, sir.
Is thought being given to how you keep such an international group as objective as possible, keep the politics of international interest, what have you? For example, it's entirely possible that somebody that doesn't even have a space program would have the best project, or a tendency for a group from one country or another to insist that they haven't had an experiment for the last 4 years, so they need to get one, whether it's not the best one or not?
Right. I fully agree with that, and the nature, and I didn't say this in my briefing, but whenever the discussion moved towards the political arena, the brakes were immediately put on, and there was a real emphasis on leaving the politics aside, and that the medical aspects and the scientific aspects would transcend those barriers, and hence inclusive. And then the answer to your question is yes, that there would be inclusion and consideration given to essentially focusing on the science, what is the best science to be done going forward, as opposed to who would be doing the science. Neil?
I know that this is a space medicine summit, but in looking at this, we were very operationally focused, as you said. And is there something we should say at some point in time here with regard to the basic research opportunity that's there? Not only basic research as it supports the mission, but also basic research as it leads to understanding some very fundamental aspects. For instance, just physical forces and their role in life systems. And whether we're talking about humans or we're talking about bacteria, it doesn't really matter. But I think that there are some very great opportunities there to see this, because this is one way we can completely nullify, or nearly completely nullify, gravitational influences and begin to understand how other forces actually impact on these living systems. And then restoring it to like 1/6 of what it would be normal would be just a grand opportunity for a lot of areas of science. So is that's going to be something that will come from here, or are we going to have to look for another venue to have that brought forward as a recommendation?
Right, and you were part of the group, and that the point that you eloquently raise is an excellent one. And this joint working group, international joint working group for science, would be the body that would be charged with looking at not only the translational and more operational research, but the fundamental research, what capabilities that are unique that exist on the station, what science needs to be done, how it gets prioritized. There needs to be a forum where the principals who are authorized and have knowledge from the different nations can come together, and there are bits and pieces of that happens now. But I think one of the hopes is that some of the fundamental science, not just in the biological sciences, but also in the physical sciences, can be integrated with some of the research activities that take place that are perhaps more applied.
Any other questions or comments? It seems to me that having seen the development of the International Space Station as it has occurred, that it truly does represent a multinational effort. There have been two key countries, maybe, or however one might want to look at it in terms of getting there, getting up there, and operating it over all the years thus far. But it seems that when we have these summits, that we get a fairly common sort of agreement that there's a need for those 4 C's, as I once referred to them, which include communication and cooperation and coordination and collaboration. But then we're hung up at this next level. And I think it would be good if there's a reason, a reasonable acceptance that we have a position that we from our point of vantage, are committed to trying to make this truly an international model for how the nations can cooperate. And I agree that it should include basic science work. Obviously, it's primarily needed to be translational, but there are many questions that basic science may answer for actually having application in long-term human spaceflight. So I don't think any doors should be closed in that regard, but I do think there's this need to have some next sort of thing recommending that. And obviously Secretary Baker got the message in his speech, and so I think that if we can just build momentum in that concept, it would be very helpful. But I don't think it'd be possible if the group in general doesn't agree with that. There is that next step, is all I'm saying.
Right. No, I fully agree. And this was one of the motivations to come into the office early this morning and put the ideas down on paper, because for my small part, what I would like to see happen is to be a part of this joint working group and to develop a position paper with the international community and to move out and to move forward. I think that's, it's always good, I think, to reflect on what we can do better. And I think one of the things that we can do better, perhaps between meetings, there's so much work, as we all know, that's involved in putting the conferences and summits together, that we kind of run out of gas when the summit ends. And I think that in some ways that's really when the work begins. And so I, for one, volunteer to help with the next step and be part of a group that would work with the international community, many of the stakeholders who are in this room and who attend this summit, to indeed move forward, because in some ways we really can't afford to have another year go by and not have made some traction in this area for reasons that have been discussed.
Jeff, Matt, just one quick thing if I can. In an effort to not let an opportunity go by, everybody has said, I think, the same thing over the course of the 2.5 days. I think one of the things we have to do is just everybody has to be a committee of one when we go back to the various communities. And most of us don't like to write, don't like to call or do anything like that. But things happen when people say something, at least here in the United States. We have a term that's called the squeaky wheel gets the oil. If we could take this model of the International Space Medicine Summit and share it with our colleagues in other communities, in every opportunity you have to do that, and say, here's what I've seen, and it works. Anessa and I were talking earlier about the first time we met. When Mr. Abbey called me, I was at NASA headquarters, and he said, I want you to come back to Houston and fly again. And I said, okay. And I asked him what mission. He said, well, it's STS-60. I said, well, isn't that the Russian mission? He said, yeah. I said, George, get real. I'm a Marine. I've spent my entire life learning how to kill those guys, and I don't want to have anything to do with that. and he said, why don't you just chill? He didn't use the term chill out because we weren't using chill back then. But he said, why don't you just settle down for a little while, and at least Sergei Krikalev and Vladimir Titov are going to be in town tomorrow night. Why don't you at least have dinner with them and before you make up your mind? And I did that. And from that meeting on, it became one of the most incredible experiences that I have had. And I've told people that time and time again when they ask, what's the most interesting experience that you had in your life? And they always assume I'm going to talk about some flight on the shuttle or something like that. But I tell them it was the experience in preparation for STS-60, which was, turned out to be my last mission, but it turned out to be the one that taught me the most and gave me the most personal gratification next to being with Marines. I have to admit that. So I said all that to say, we really do need to go back to our individual communities and talk about this experience and this model, if you will. And I think things will change.
Great. I think Dr. Alford wanted to, excuse me, if we could have the, or maybe, great. Just one second.
I wanted to say and follow up, one country cannot do this alone. That is the key issue in many ways, but together we can do almost anything. So I think it's very important that we get a feeling for this group. What we're talking about, and I think what Charlie just referred to, is we're going to need to go back and get others to appreciate why this is as complex as it is, but also why it is as meritorious as it is to really begin to work in synergy with each other. And I would hope we could come to either something like is there consensus in this issue about this way of hoping to move forward? We've done everything we can almost from the operational political standpoint. We don't have the political strength to do it, but collectively we have more. So my point is, can't we get some feeling? Is there consensus about this, Jeff? Or is there, if there is any real opposition, I guess we could accept that as consensus, no consensus. But if there's no real opposition, we can accept that as consensus. I think we need to get that out on the table and see if there is consensus in this regard.
Right. No, I agree fully. And actually, this was one of the discussion themes within our group as a microcosm of the summit representatives, and perhaps even as a broader community. There was consensus. And I think now we need to broaden that. I think Dr. Bogomolov.
I would like to draw your attention to the fact that usually amongst scientists we do not have a lot of contradiction on the issues that we usually discuss. Unfortunately, the structures that determine the politics, these are the agencies of the partners and the program office that defines the rules of communication and the procedures of our interaction. Because of that, I would like to propose that the findings of the summit will be brought up to the management of the agencies of the partners and will be also presented in the program office of the ISS. And this will become a significant step for realization of the goals of the positions that we have defined here by Mr. Sutton. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's excellent points. Excellent points.
Sorry, Jeff, if I could. I'd like to say that from my side, I've been lucky enough to work with colleagues in Russia and in the UK and over here in the US. And I could honestly say, if you're looking for assets to actually go and do this, Jeff, I'm happy to put myself forward to help you facilitate this. I think across the board I've been lucky enough, like I said, not working at the political level, but on an educational, at the university and research level, that there's a desire to do this across the board between the different countries that are actually working in space currently. So I definitely think that we need to have more of a time scale, because this event happens once a year and it's a fantastic event, like you said. The momentum needs to keep going, even if it is at a level where we're getting information to administrators and agencies. But the people in this room are the ones that need to keep on doing this on an ongoing basis, or at least identify people that can keep on doing this and drive this forward as an agenda for everyone. And I think that if, like you said, there's a time determining step that needs to be said or had, I think that we should, as a group, kind of put forward a time determining step. When is that time? When do we feel is the best time to get it done? And like you said, it's critical. The urgency is there. And as more things happen, we need to try to facilitate the utilization of our facilities that we have.
Okay, I have a few words. Excuse me. I quite agree with the point of view by the Dr. Sutton's speech and what the most speakers hold, I think. This is the first time for a Chinese delegation to attend such kind of a meeting, and thanks a lot for the organizers of the SMS to give us a chance to be here. And really, I'm very happy, very glad to have this chance to talk, to speak, to listen. And really, we feel that this SMS is quite a success. And really, we hope that in the future we'll have such a good chance to attend this meeting. And what I should say that the international cooperation in the future, I think, is very, very important. Also, I told that in my presentation that China has developed its own space program. I think this program should also need the international support in the future. And actually, during the implementation of this program, we also have developed better cooperation with a lot of countries such as Russia and European countries. And now, this is the first time to be in U.S. After 10 years long, because in almost 1998, I visited America, and really maybe it's a little bit longer, but I think it's not too late. So this time I'll be here, and very happy to share a lot of opinions with all the experts from the world in space field. And I noticed that a lot of people say that we should have international platform and standards, and also some research in the future should be backed by some rules, or in the maybe more wider fields. So I quite agree with this point of view, and Chinese experts also will devote his wisdom and his efforts to enrich such kind of cooperation with the experts from the world. And also will maybe put some suggestions to the government to notice that. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. And I think that, we echo your sentiments and are also thrilled to have China, to have you and your colleagues come so far and participate in this summit.
Very, very good summary, Jeff. Why don't you try to push this on the agenda for the upcoming ISILWIG meeting? Wouldn't this make or somehow to talk about what came out of here and propose this as a next step?
Sure, I'd be glad to do that. I'm not actually part of ISIL-SWIG. And so even within the U.S., there are people here who could do that. But again, I think that it's a step forward, but I think we also need to be aware of the Russian position, and to I think it's important to build consensus almost really in a symmetric way. I think okay. Great.
Я тоже хотела бы
I also, first of all, would like to note that from the heated discussion that we had yesterday, it was not very strictly organized, I should say. Jeff actually managed to come up with a great resume. He extracted the main important points that demonstrated what was important about yesterday's discussion. We had representatives from the medical field, from the science field, from the fundamental science, and also astronaut office was represented. It seemed that it would not be possible to find common ground for all these three different teams, but it turned out to be possible. And we only had 1.5 hours to do that. That means that if we systematically have this approach, we are going to have success. And the main positions that were underlined here show us at least the path where to go. We will need to form a team, an international forum that will be a guiding beacon for us. I understand with Mr. Davis that this team and what is happening on the station should not be concentrated on the medical issues only, because that will show us that the station is only for medicine. No, station is not only for medicine. This is a very expensive endeavor, and we need to extract new knowledge from it. And we have to have priorities that will include science. And that's why we continue flying. The team that we are going to form, Jeff, is something that should not be comprised only of the application science people. See, I can be both in medicine and in science, but some people are constricted by science and some people are constricted by medicine. But there are also people who make science, and they will have to be represented in our team, and the priorities cannot be given only to the important issues of medicine today. We have to have people there who deal with fundamental science. What is fundamental science? Let's agree on the fact that what is fundamental today will become an application science tomorrow. And maybe in 5 years, in 50 years, it will become something that the society is going to use. Otherwise, why we are doing that? Thank you.
Yes, спасибо большое. I think that I fully agree, and I liked maybe it was just in the translation, but the use of extraction and heat and so forth. It is very reminiscent of an environment in which you find jewels. And so I think it's absolutely a very good point, again, restated in some ways of the fact that I don't think we're blind to the importance of the inclusion of the fundamental science voice in this joint international group. I think that the emphasis really, as was discussed yesterday and throughout the summit, is on having the science and the medicine transcend the international barriers that exist.
Well,
I think
you kind of get some consensus on this point of going and trying to be persistent in this, but I think we need to go a little bit farther and just do people put it on the table. Do we have the courage to do that? And that's what it boils down to. We know that we've got clarity in what our thoughts are in general, but we need to have some uniformity, I think, and consensus about do we go as we go home and talk with people who can make those agreements and sorts of things beyond us, that these are the things we need to be really successful in this enterprise, which must have the interests of the world. And I'm glad that China has developed relationships, as they described, with other countries. So we truly have an opportunity, but I think if we're timid, it's going to be the same next year. I think we have to have some boldness here.
Right, I agree. I mean, what happens is that a motion can be put forward. We don't really have necessarily a formal structure. Fine, there we go. And I think the motion to perhaps put on the table whether or not, as Dr. Alford asked, whether or not there is consensus. And we could do that by a show. There is consensus on. That there's consensus that, as I understand it, that we should form a working group, a joint working group that's international. Is that not correct? Oh, okay.
No, I think we have.
We have.
No, I think the time has come that we need to say, basically, that we are in agreement as a group of important and I would say leading biomedical scientists, physicians, engineers have participated, that we feel that it's very important that our governments, our countries get together behind the International Space Station and promote the collaboration and the cooperation at all levels and to the best extent possible magnify and enhance the work that we all have visioned for trying to accomplish in order to be able to ensure safe long-duration human spaceflight and to do other things that will be of great benefit to all the people on Earth. So it's not another working group. It's to say, do we have that consensus, and then we can all individually work toward it, as has been mentioned.
Yes, I think a consensus that we all endorse the enhancement of international cooperation and have a great desire to see it enhanced and undertaken.
Jeff, one thing that was brought out in this panel that didn't come out yet, that a number of us, I think, felt fairly strongly about, was that we don't create a control or review board monster. Getting operational or scientific research passed through boards is difficult enough, and now you've added another layer of bureaucracy to this process when you're losing valuable time. I think Volker Dahmen brought that up, and I didn't want that to get lost on this consensus, which I think through the smoke, a number of us did agree with this recommendation. However, whatever way you go about enacting this on an international level, that you're not creating levels and layers that are going to bog down a system that's already somewhat cumbersome and difficult to get research done. I don't know if anyone has anything else to say about that, but that certainly there was some sense among us about that.
I guess on the working level, there is a commitment. We've seen it. ISS was built under that objectives. It is true, though, in the last 10 years, objectives have been changing somewhat. When ISS started, ISS was the main objective where science was building up in mainly on basic science, but also on countermeasures and future missions. However, in the middle of ISS assembly, we have progressed. We put an acceleration into exploration that may have created some new expectation, but of course the community needs to digest this, and it's in this phase of digestion of these new greater objectives that are more complex, and I believe that again on the working level there is ample evidence that integration and working together is the only way to go, and we are doing it. I was observing that on the medical discipline we came up with a Med Volume B, which is basically we are singing out of a same sheet of music. All the IPs are doing that, so I would take this and I suggested to use this as a baseline, where it shows that we are working together, using the same, trying to use the same hardware, trying to use the same procedures, and trying to look at the human individual as a common asset to know more, to assure health and ethical exploration of space. So I think if we look at our current accomplishments that I guess the MMOP has reached after 15 years of operations in integration, I think we just have to go the next step now, because the objectives are greater, but we should not discard the fact that the ISS is up there, and it will be up there for at least another 10 years, and now it's only coming now to fruition, and make the best out of it. And I don't think, I have no doubt that anyone at working level have the clear understanding what the objectives are, and we're working together towards those objectives, but continuity is key. So politically, it's important to give us on a working level the continuity, that we know we can base our work on something that is well thought out. It's not going to change tomorrow or in the next years. We have a plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, and we got to pursue it. And the MMOP is an example. MMOP has started working in 95. It's basically 2009 now, and we had 103 meetings, and we have common documents. So, and everybody, all of the IPs have signed those documents, and we endorse them. So I think we should just grow on that, and this is the example that ISS should grow on, and exploration as well.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other discussion points? I'm not sure that we've completely resolved this issue. I think.
I haven't heard anything that says there isn't consensus.
Okay.
Yeah, there is consensus.
Right.
Okay. You need a motion and a second and a show of hands?
Well, I feel a little bit awkward actually, because I think that as the discussion leader, really perhaps the organizers of the meeting might wish to tell us in some ways how to proceed with respect to motions and so forth. I don't know.
Can I make a proposal that Dr. Alford suggested that unless we agreed on some further step, we'll be discussing the same thing next year. And there's a comment from Dr. Shearing. If we are to for set up a separate review or a steering committee, that will be a monster, and we also agree on that. And by my observation, I've been observing this ISS activities since 1993. But other than this forum, there's nothing else that can straightly voice what's the necessary research should be, because if the
ISLA SWG, kept the promise that they are going to coordinate all their themes, and they couldn't do that, so they fell to the forum for just coordinating the hardware and without the Russians. And I don't think that from now on that the same working group will transform something else. And if we start something else, why not this, the summit?
Right. Mr. Abbey? Yeah. Just one second.
Well, I guess I'll ask the question of the group. Do we have a consensus or not?
Yes.
If there's no objections, Dr. Alford and I will consider we have consensus. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you.
Now we can proceed to Group B.
Good morning. I think you might hear some of the same similar themes that were talked about with the ISS that might also you'll see in our working group, which was to address some of the collaborative efforts internationally for ground-based analog collaborative research. And first, let me just tell you a little bit about our group. We had a very, very diverse group. It was great. I'd say the common denominator was that each individual in the group had some kind of unique experience and knowledge about specific analogs. So that was terrific. And they also represented broadly different disciplines. We had radiation, behavioral health, we had medical surgery, emergency room, we had bone loss, we had other disciplines represented. So we had a lot of scientific knowledge, brain power in the group as well. And then, of course, we had international representation, Russia, Canada, ESA, U.S. We did not have China, unfortunately, and of course, Japan. So we were missing a couple of what we think could be key players in that. In our discussions, we found that some analogs, current analogs, have a lot of already have considerable international participation. Devon Island, HMP, is a great example of that. ESA, Canada, U.S. participate regularly in the Devon Island experience. Antarctica also has a great model for that. Do you know that there are 56 nations that participate in Antarctica? There's 70 different research stations. I mean, that's an incredible international analog, space analog. Mars 500, which is also getting going, has international participation. They have Russia, ESA, Italy. In the 105, the U.S. participates. We cannot participate in the 500 because there's an legal impediment to that. There's the Iran, the Non-Proliferation Act with the Iran-Contra thing, and so we can participate in 105 because it falls under the umbrella of ISS planning and preparation, but we cannot participate in the 500 study as of this time. There's also analogs, though they have no international participation, or very rare. Desert rats is a good example of that. NEMO is pretty much restricted has primarily been United States. So we just talked about the analogs in terms of some of them, and you know that from the great, the earlier a day earlier when Dave Williams moderated the analog panel, that there's different fidelities associated with the different analog characteristics, particularly with regard to mission operations scenarios. And NEMO comes across very high on that. Other analogs are great in terms of the real estate that they have. For example, what I mean by that is that the real estate's very similar to, for example, lunar terrain. And again, that would be like Houghton Mars and Devon Island. They represent a lot of hazards that could be experienced in the space exploration scenarios. So while we were very, albeit analog-centric in our group, I want to assure you that there's no bias in the following statement that represented a consensus in our group, and that was that space analogs fill a critical gap in keeping humans safe, healthy, and productive for human spaceflight, and that they are a necessary component of our space exploration strategy. and that they're going to provide a venue for translational research so that we can transition the science for operationally relevant products and deliverables that we need in order to have long-duration, safe, and productive spaceflight. We also know that there is no one and be-all, space analog that fulfills all our needs, and that we need to be much more systematic and much more integrative in how we utilize the various analogs for reducing the human space exploration risks. And we believe that the international collaboration is the opportunity to provide us both the systematic assessments that we need and the integrative quality of the work. Some of the people in our group wanted to go through all the analogs and talk about their different characteristics, but we decided that that would never fit in the hour and a half that we had. So what we did was try to limit the scope of our work, and I think you'll hear some interesting products that came out of that discussion. We talked about what is an analog, and we debated that a little bit, and we ended up putting them into two different categories. There's the operational analogs, and there are the experimental analogs. The operational analogs are really your field type settings, and the experimental analogs are primarily the laboratory studies, much more controlled environments. Bed rest is a great example of that. The advantage of that is that you can get large databases, and the analogs again suffer from the low ends. Other examples of the experimental ones would be the radiation labs, immersions, the European InVihab, some of the lighting studies that we do. Those are all under the experimental laboratory studies. The operational analogs are more apt to test the feasibility of the tools, the technologies, our protocols, and the experimental and the laboratory studies are much more conducive at this time are much more conducive to standardized processes. But this is really a goal for both our types of analogs, the experimental as well as the operational. The operational analogs are also important for what they provide in terms of the training, which is very important for exploration missions. They provide training for crew, training for medical requirements, and of course training for ground operations as well. We also think that it's important that there's a process that becomes evident for the international community and all other users of analogs, and that's the process that how it flows from perhaps the laboratory, the experimental setting, into the analog environments, the different kinds of fidelities that are offered by those different analog environments, and that needs to be transparent to everybody, and so that might be something that we could elucidate in the future, define it and elucidate it. And that flow will help bring systematic and integrative nature to how we use analogs. So, what are some of the challenges facing analogs? Well, some of that, of course, right off the bat, is the costs and the financial issues. It costs money to do work in analogs, but we think through international collaboration, we can leverage off of that and help with some of the costs of that. And that will take, of course, coordination and opportunities to discuss this kind of stuff. But cost will help us in developing better measures. They'll help us in standardizing our measures, and they'll help us use our measures in these multiple analogs. Another challenge is perceptions. You heard that in the earlier in the summit here, that there's an image and a credibility issue about some of the analog work that's done, and is it really a boondoggle for some of these things or not? And I know I'm here to say no, it's not. And I think everybody in our working group would agree, this work that we do in analogs is very critical for exploration missions, as I talked about earlier. And as a matter of fact, our group said that the analogs really represent a microcosm of the international community, because everybody in the international community uses the analogs, and here's a great opportunity to really benefit from that. Another challenge is there are no forums that we know of that we could have identified to really discuss our use of analogs. This is one of the first ones. So that was an important observation. How can you collaborate if you don't have the opportunities to discuss it? In terms of international coordinations, how can we really coordinate and integrate? What are the models that we can use? The ISSMP, I know there's some flaws that we just talked about with that, but also they do integrate and coordinate, and they do some of that extremely well, and so that's an excellent model. The Mars 500 is also a good model that we could use. Antarctica, with its 56 nations, is also a good model that we could use. The fidelity of the space analogs and their characteristics, we need to be much more systematic in how we use those analogs, because we want to be able to we want to optimize how we use those analogs. We want to make sure that they address our critical needs. And so in order to do that, we need to find out how the characteristics answer different questions. And so which analogs provide the appropriate fidelity and are going to address the different critical issues. And so we think that could be something that could, through collaboration, become much more evident. We also talked about the value of the analogs. And of course, I already mentioned in terms of the ops concepts and training that they're extraordinarily valuable. The higher fidelity they are with the space missions, the better they are in terms of operational. They provide mission objectives, they provide the timeline, they provide the crew, sometimes participate in the analogs, also the ground control. Support is also a good resource with some of these analogs as well. And they're also an excellent opportunity to provide a place for really testing and validating hardware and technologies and tools. And some of them do it better than others. There's also, the group also talked about the educational venue that they also provide, and this is also very important. Analogs, each one of them have their own stories. And each one of them represent an awful lot of different kinds of opportunities. And there's also, every one of them has a whole array of different visuals that I think would pique the interest of every child, K through 12 and further on. And so we think there's a real opportunity to mine that information. There's a story about preparing for space here on Earth, and that story is told and unfolds in the analogs. And so we think that would also be something that we could collaborate on. We think students and teachers, they could participate daily via the web in what's going on in the analogs, and that would also enrich the educational value. And you have to also make sure that that's part of the standard operating procedures, almost policy, that there's an educational component tied into the implementation of the work being done on the analogs, much like the NVHAB is currently doing. We have some recommendations for both of you, Mr. Abbey and Dr. Alford. First of all, we think we need to really characterize the pros and cons of all the different space analogs. Of course, this will take time, and it'll take the input from various experts, but we think it's very important. And we need to do an international inventory and catalog of all of our analogs, and we think that's very critical. We need to define a systematic process for optimal utilization of our analogs, and I alluded to that earlier. That's also a critical step for going forward. Another recommendation lies in the review, in the vetting of how do we select the work that we do on analogs? How do we select the analogs themselves? How do we prioritize what we're going to do on these analogs? So we need to assess both the science and the operational feasibility. We need to have some kind of international oversight for prioritizing and selecting all of the different analogs, the studies that go on in the different analogs. We thought perhaps joint RFPs or RFAs with the international communities would be a good possible option for doing that. And international or intergovernmental agreements for utilization in some of the areas that we can't, there are current barriers to, like I just talked about earlier with the Mars 500, where there's actually a legal barrier that we can't get through right now. We also think it'd be very important to leverage the collaborations internationally that are currently being done. We need integration teams to vector all of the requirements for the different analogs. We need to develop cost-sharing plans with our international partners. I think that'll help defray some of the costs of analog research. We need data sharing plans and agreements. And not only do we need to share the data, but we need to do this regularly and at least annually, because there's an awful lot of information that comes out of the analogs that doesn't get communicated in a way that is accessible to everybody. And I think it would really inform us going forward for our space flight exploration studies. We need to make educational outreach a priority. And I think that's very clear from some of the discussions we heard in the past day and a half, and we really think analogs will really help with that. We have some technical, what I call tactical recommendations. We want to convene an annual international analog workshop. We could link this to some of the existing forums for this, ASMA, IAA, or COSPAR. We also talked about maybe we need to establish an international space analog network. We think that might be a good idea. There was a lot of support for that in the group. We also thought that if we had, I don't like to use this word a lot, but maybe it's time to bring it back up, but some kind of a roadmap for international participation in analogs, a way that we can coordinate, well, not just coordinate, but develop guidance and a system for how do we participate in the different analogs. We want to involve all of the stakeholders, and of course there's many of them, NSBRI, all the international partners, China, and of course commercial. And we need to learn from our current experience with analogs as an international community to ensure that the knowledge and experience of our analog research is done on a regular basis. And so those are some of the thoughts that we had, and it was as I said, a well-informed group, and we think it's the beginning of a way to really go forward, because up to now it's really been done in a very disparate fashion. And so we think with these suggestions that we could have put a plan in place that would help us really utilize and optimally make use of our analogs for space exploration. I want to thank all of the participants in our group. It was an excellent discussion, and if they have anything else to add, I welcome that. Okay, I'll take questions then.
One question, Kazu Shimada from JAXA. And for confined study, social isolation, and the NEMO type mission, and the Devon Island type mission, there aren't many projects, and we all know about that. So coordination through maybe ISSP shouldn't be a problem. But for the Antarctica, there are so many stations, and I guess there should be some forum, among them. And is there any possibility that forum like this or ISSP have chance to talk them as a group?
So you're asking, should there be a separate forum for dealing with some of the individual analogs like Antarctica?
Yeah, it's Jeff.
Yes, Jeff can answer that.
Jeff Hayden from Australia. I'm the Deputy Chief Officer of the SCAR, Scientific Committee of Antarctic Research, Life Sciences Expert Group of Human Biology and Medicine. Oliver Ungra is an associate member, and Christian Otto is as well. And we have that forum, which we meet every 2 years, and an intersessional meeting annually, and the expert group has on its constitution the opportunity to translate Antarctic work to other extreme environments. So you'd be welcome to engage with that group.
Is there a way to distribute the findings of that group on a wider basis?
The Scientific Committee of Antarctic Research is part of the International Council of Scientific Unions, and that is the umbrella group, and it is tasked from the Antarctic Treaty to answer scientific questions, whether it's biological or climate or human biology and medicine. So that's the framework, and scientific outputs are published in peer-reviewed journals. The medical side, we have a website that is being revisited at the moment called Medical Antarctica, and I'd be happy to be the contact through my email, which you've all got, if you've got any questions while that's being revisited.
Okay, great. Dave?
Thank you for a very nice summary, Dr. Leviton. I just wanted to touch briefly on something that you had said in your summary, because it's actually come up in some of the other discussions this weekend, and that had to do with joint international RFAs or research announcements. Just those of us who have been involved in peer review for NASA, we would always get excited about the possibility of doing some sort of an international solicitation. And let me just mention very briefly a couple of reasons for that. Anytime we're able to get international reviewers on panels even for NASA peer review, we think it really increases the quality of the reviews. Obviously, many of the experts are not Americans, not in the United States, so we always think that's a plus. And then also it allows us to know more about what's going on elsewhere. I think it leads to less duplication of research, and so just if I could just enthusiastically give a thumbs up to possibly that kind of a call in the future.
Yeah, we see that. That would be a great venue if we can possibly do that. Put out some research announcements for doing analog work. This is so loud.
Let me just make a quick comment that has been on my mind, which maybe I should have made also yesterday in the group, and which also is in some way applicable to the summary that we had of the first discussion group. International announcements were just mentioned. Probably most of you are aware that at the moment there's an international research announcement in life sciences out there for flight experiments in the frame of Iselzwick. And that already shows you a number of the challenges in that endeavor and some of the major hurdles. Of course, since this is coming from Iselzwick, our Russian colleagues, for example, are not part of the research announcement. Now, what is even more interesting, I find, is that when it comes to the different partners, NASA, for example, is only participating in the biology part of the life sciences research announcement, not in the physiology part, because that is being defined in-house in the current programmatic frame. Now, that for me is a symptom of what I see as the major challenge for the very nice consensus that we have for international collaboration. In the end, what has to be realized is that any of the partner entities has different goals and different approaches. For example, NASA at this point in time, even when it comes to fundamental research, is extremely operationally oriented, whereas in Europe we're basically the exact opposite. We have a very strong focus on fundamental science. Our Russian partners, I think, have a fairly balanced way, which is both operational as well as fundamental research. And of course, our Japanese colleagues and Chinese colleagues, everyone has their own priorities and different approach. And that is what is making coming to a coherent roadmap so difficult and maybe even unrealistic. I think I did not object to the statement that was being made in the first group, because I think it's something that is worth striving for. At the same time, we have to realize that in this group we are a very select audience. We are discussing mainly from the operational side. Even a number of the fundamental scientists that are in the audience have been aligned more or less to the operational goals that have been defined. Otherwise, they would not even get funding from NASA at the moment for their activities. So that I think is a little bit a bias, which makes us think a lot more optimistically about some of the ideas that have been proposed, which certainly are something that we need to strive on, but at the same time we also should be realistic in what we expect from these initiatives.
Yeah, I think we have to be able to if we're going to move forward, there are things that would work and integrate very well, but we don't want to lose sight that there are individual goals and objectives internationally that also have to be recognized and appreciated and have to work in that kind of in this system. And I think there's room for that in this kind of a plan and strategy. And I think we can craft it so that it would work for everybody, I think, so that all of their ends could be realized. But that's good. That's important for us to be sensitive and aware of that. I agree. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
We were ready for Group C. I think this is going to be a very exciting group to hear from today, based on yesterday's activity.
Because now for me it's official presentation, I should go from my terrible English to native Russian. Это действительно было необычное.
This was a very unusual and a very active session, and I wanted to express gratitude to all of the participants in the meeting and the panelists especially that were very active in generating recommendations, in discussing the general issues. And I have a special thanks for Karl Deutsch, who is not here with us right now, and without him many of the outcomes could not have been worded as specifically as we attempted to do. Prior to starting our work, we separated all of the problematics into three sections: child education, college student training, and postgraduate education. At every level, the issue of education was supposed to have been examined through or from the standpoint of international cooperation. That was the primary requirement. That was the key requirement. I should say that the most time and the most passion was spent talking about high school K through 12 education and parent education and the ability to use all of the space sciences, including life sciences, to motivate children and improve the quality of their education, to engage them in being interested in finding out about their environment. And everybody agreed that this should use all the possible means and methods available to the national space agencies. Anything that's available, all available means that are available to governments, to ministries of education, to foundations. And we should do our best to support the enthusiasts and the volunteers and the activists that work in this area and involve their environment, including individual involvement of people working for agencies and taking part in space research. In many cases, this activity is voluntary only, on a voluntary basis. And we're thankful to these people, and we should support them with everything we got. Then we proceeded to college student education, and we may not have had a lot of euphoria here. The participants shared the capabilities and the approaches that are being used in the course of college student education, but at least I was confident that the initiatives that are being undertaken by the various universities and the various countries and universities, both medical and technical, are very timely and very good and very correct. There are universities that set up chairs, that set up electives in space medicine, in life support, in gravitational biology, in biotechnology, fundamental research, are on the right track. We concentrated on involving students and in actual projects and on international student exchanges and on supporting student research. And I think that we must get support and we must appeal both to the national space agencies and the various foundations. And I think that whereas in Europe, including Russia, there are ways that are being developed and are continuing to be developed to exchange students, and there are government-sponsored foundations supporting this exchange. It turns out that it is very difficult to exchange students between the US and Russia, although Russia frequently receives US exchange students supported by the various foundations. Participants in the discussion discussion expressed concern about the employment prospects of new graduates. Everyone agreed that we should not lose the talents and the motivated young people from the new generation that would like to work in space exploration. This is the generation that is already coming into and will continue coming into this area of activity. When we proceeded to graduate education, I was very surprised that the discussion died down and there was an opinion expressed that this stage is very customized and it is essentially up to the various postgraduate students and their research advisors. But it should be noted that this is the final stage in knowledge transfer, and this is joint research by different generations of researchers, which is a very important step, although this could be very singular and but that's always been the case, and that's going to continue. Approaches in the various countries for granting access to young researchers to space platforms are very different. I know that Europe has youth projects. I know that NASA has this sort of projects. I know that Moscow builds separate satellites for young researchers. But all of the participants remarked that access for young researchers to space platforms, including the ISS, should be maximized to implement the ideas of this new generation of researchers. Therefore, the draft finding of our team, we started out with making a statement.
International Space Station is available as an international, accessible and inspiring tool for all levels of education in many countries to foster international cooperation. And then we divided our findings and our recommendation up to two parts. Age group K-12 findings. There is an urgent need for more information and active training opportunities for teachers, museums, and science centers to effectively address space and its benefits, national security, exploration, and competitiveness, and recommendation. Increase visibility of the information and training gaps and their importance to senior management in national space and education authorities as a systemic problem regarding science and technology teaching. Expand outreach opportunities. Use space sector resources person for outreach in schools and museums and newsletters. Establish national competition with top prizes where appropriate would involve projects and flight opportunities. And establish a living international best practices education documents for teaching this community. And the second part, university level. Finding. The number of aerospace programs at university is sufficient at this time, but could need expansion in future. By and large, program content is much to needs of the employment sector, but need more hands-on opportunities outside the university. There is an insufficient number of students for the broader needs of S&T for future demands and for aerospace sector in 3 to 4 years. There is a potential short-term challenge for job opportunities in the aerospace, but not in the longer term. And recommendation. Universities should work closely with employers to match needs. more cooperative activities and exchanges between universities should be encouraged. More short-term internship need for students in workforce, more hands-on experience, more cross-disciplinary training, and last but not the least, international project opportunity at university level on ISS for all partners. Thank you very much. Maybe some comments or questions.
In response to Dr. Alford's question earlier in the first group about do we want to do something, I would recommend that we make those findings and recommendations available to every single one of us to take back to wherever we're going and to take it into your state legislatures, take it into your national governments and everything. If you'll give me a copy right now, I'm going to put it in my pocket with me tomorrow, and at least I'll leave one thing where I'm going. So I'd recommend we use that.
And I second what Charlie just said. It certainly would be helpful for me to promote that if it comes out under the heading of the summit as a finding and a recommendation on an international level that I can take forward.
Just to remind people who weren't there, one of the problems that we noted for getting students involved with the International Space Station is the long amount of time which typically it takes to get something flown. And so we made the point that it's extremely important to take advantage of hardware which is already up there and which could be utilized by students on a time compatible with a student's studies. And so in terms of how projects like this should be organized, I think that's a very important point, because you can't, if you're talking about developing anything new, the amount of time that is required is just too long for the career of an average student.
I think a good example of a program that made use of existing systems that were on board shuttle and can use them on station. It's Sally Ride's EarthCam program, which was a program that got established at the elementary school levels at a number of places around the country and internationally.
I think Mr. Avin and Jess is very important. I think that's where analogs can play a role in taking into account the short period of time for the student career. And if we can maximize a good system of analogs that are interrelated with the space operations or ISS, will be a good intermediate solution, I guess. It'll be useful for our region educational in the short term.
Аналоги всегда очень удобны и правильно их использовать как для подготовки экспериментов,
for
так
both
и для
preparation of
поиска новых
experiments
решений.
and search for new solutions.
Yeah, the previous chief of the astronaut office once told me, I wish we could get as much media interest in the space station operations that are going on as we get every time we do a NEMO mission. And I think Marcelo's comment is a good one. We have a lot of interest because these analogs bring a lot of visual coolness when they're going on, and so it generates a lot of media interest. It generates a lot of student interest. Some of these analogs make outreach a critical part of what they're doing, and all of them could, I think, if we chose to do if we chose to actively do it that way. But the other thing, to echo Marcelo's comment, we can integrate experiments in analogs on a very quick time frame. In the matter of months, we can have an experiment going on an analog that's relevant, but that would never have passed through all the boards and procedures of normal spaceflight. So it's a resource that we just ought to keep in mind if we're trying to promote our message, our educational message, out to the world and to our students around our different countries.
Я абсолютно с вами согласна. Есть только один момент.
I absolutely agree. Just one thing, even for analog research, when the information is disseminated via television and media, there is still some period of preparation required and some period of integration of the experiment in the module. Institutes understand this, and our institute has been working on that, and we found a way to do this. We do use television and newspapers and other means of dissemination of information, but we also have umbrella agreements with schools. We give speeches there, we provide lectures, students come over to our laboratories, they look at what we are doing, and that provides us the necessary time for the students to prepare their proposals and bring in their ideas that can be incorporated into the program. And this, I think, is a good solution. We have to combine the interests of all parties.
Ludmila, first of all, thank you for summarizing and leading that group so effectively. From the point of view of one of the universities that has a graduate program in bioastronautics, I welcome the summary. It will be helpful to all of us in that position to bring back to our universities, where in these times of economic reductions and fiscal difficulties, we need to go and present the need seen by a group like this for our graduates. One other point. We all agreed over the importance of having the students have hands-on experience, from the K through 12 up through the young researchers. Hands-on experience to really become identified with the space research community. And there are certain barriers now, barriers of access of international students, both in the United States and elsewhere. And I believe that we must continue to try to work on bringing down those barriers.
Larry, thank you very much. I don't know how about close the barriers, but I have a copy, our joint decision, and I should give to organizer in electronic or on paper.
I had one thing to follow on with Jeff's comment there with regard to the time required and its inconsistency with graduate education and even undergraduate research. And we've gotten a little bit better with that, but I think that one of the things that we want to keep in mind with that is not to abandon that concept, because most of our research that we do with graduate students, and I'm saying ours as faculty, is sponsored by one of the granting agencies, and so it's not up to the student to get the grant. But once we have that in place and we have students, we have to look at how we're going to use International Space Station differently from the kind of payload mentality that we had when we ran shuttle all the time and shuttle experiments. And I have a graph that I show that actually shows from inception of a concept to writing the grant all the way through to doing the experiments necessary to get what I call an LPU. It's a least publishable unit, okay? and it's over 11 years, all right? And so that's inconsistent with graduate education, it's inconsistent with a postdoctoral fellow, and it's indeed inconsistent with trying to get tenure, right? If you have to wait that long to get your results. And so when you look at the space station is really very, very different in that regard. Depending on the nature of the research you do, you can send a lot of conditioned specimens to the space station. And in a 100-day increment, you can actually run 6 or 7 experiments. It takes that 11-year timeline and collapses it down to 4 years, which is a substantial change over what it was before. So I think that when we look at this and look at how we want to use station in education, we ought to consider the fact that if we wisely use that opportunity, to send multiple specimens and do multiple experiments with even variations in each iteration of the experiment. There are accommodations that can take care of that. You just have to plan in advance, and I think that these things can be done. So it's not all is lost with trying to do something within the time constant of a graduate student's career.
Comment. I think one of the things we all agreed on was this worrying disconnect with science and engineering at the graduate and postgraduate levels. And we discussed at length, really, the need for reconnect at the very earliest stage, at the elementary school levels. And not only with the youngsters, but also at the teacher level as well. I mean, on the positive side, we identified these valuable resources which exist. I mean, really exciting resources, because, of course, anything to do with space is exciting. Those resources are out there. But it was discussed, I think, that maybe there should be a website or portal, perhaps, which is at an international level, to actually bring these resources together so that they're there for the teachers at elementary school levels, or anybody at all levels, so that they can access these resources easily.
I thought I'd managed to keep my mouth shut this morning, but not possible. So I was very encouraged to hear what was said about education and outreach yesterday. I've been to a lot of these meetings over the last decade, and whether it's with Oliver at European Space Agency, whether it's in the UK, everyone who's involved in space exploration, human or automated platform, always says the same thing. Always says outreach is important, always says we're a part of the solution to the problem of the decline in interest in science. But certainly from the people that I've worked with in Europe, that line appears in every report that we've ever written, and no one ever acts on it in a way in which I think it really changes the way that we do it. I have not yet seen, at least across the Atlantic, a comprehensive, properly resourced program of education and outreach that makes a difference. I have seen no real efforts, again, across the pond to try and gain an objective view about whether we're doing any good, and if we're not, to try and steer it in a direction in which we can. So, I'm encouraged to hear how important people think this is, but you've got about, 5-10 years left of the thing on the screen at the minute, and I think the single most important delivery item that you can have out of it at the end is to have a demonstrable impact upon K through 12 and beyond attitudes to science and culture. But I don't think you do that. Don't underestimate how hard that's going to be in terms of the requirements for resource and coordinated action.
На самом деле я не могу согласиться с вами, потому что,
in fact, I cannot quite agree with you, because at least in Russia, even for space experiments with greenhouse, for example, we are bringing in children. It is a long preparation time. This is not the case when a child comes in, can see a plant which is grown in certain conditions and says, yes, I want to do that. No, a group of school children was preparing their own experiment with the help of our specialists. All the measurements were done within their school facility as well as in our institute. They were receiving data from on board, and the crew on board was getting
the data from the students, how their plants are growing, and it was an impressive experience for the children. I didn't quite understand about spin-off, about the research on ISS, but I would encourage you to visit our institute. I'm sure Inessa Benediktovna will show you how specifically medical developments are being applied in countermeasures field. They are being used in the clinics. We are a research facility, but in Moscow hospitals, these findings are already being actively used. We are trying. It all takes time. Everybody says it takes a long time to bring something into medicine. It's good to have an idea, but you have to verify it many times. It does take time, but it is feasible. Of course, we would like to expedite the time. We want to see the changes, but I think people who are gathered here, they're not indifferent people, and they do what they can, but they need time.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Well, I think everyone can agree it's been a busy 3 days and nights, but there's been an enormous amount of information exchanged and experiences expressed, and I think a lot of very productive recommendations have been made. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to come to this summit. I also want to ask if you would please express our appreciation to your universities and your organizations for your being here and how much we appreciate your being here. I would like to encourage you. I know you probably, like most of the things I see, you pay no attention to evaluation forms, but I really would like for you to complete those evaluation forms for each day. They mean a lot, and they mean a lot because it gives us real pause for thought based on the scores. I want to thank all of the various agencies who've helped us and entities and that have helped us develop this program. In particular, I want to express my deep appreciation to General Director Yusakov and to his team and to Inessa Kozlovskaya for talking with me on the phone and with the others to help us shape and make this, I think, a worthwhile experience for everybody. And George, would you like to say any further comments? But thank you all very much from our part.
Well, I would just like to echo what Bobby has said. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to come to this summit and contribute to the discussions. I think we've had some very good discussions over these 3 days, and obviously some very good recommendations. And Bobby and I will deal with those recommendations and try to get those out to you so you all have copies of them. But I think we appreciate the consensus that we reached earlier this morning, and I think we will certainly take that forward as best Bobby and I can to see if we can enhance our international cooperation and make it happen as best we can. Because I think it is important to maximize the return we can get from the space station and bring in international partners and countries that can contribute and make it a better program. So again, thank you all, and we really appreciate you being here, and I hope you've enjoyed the last 3 days because we've certainly enjoyed being here with you.